After many years as a classical musician, I produced and accompanied a children's musical theater production at the college and suddenly found myself completely hooked on this Broadway magic. Children's shows gave way to adult shows. The multipurpose room was abandoned for an 800-seat proscenium theater, and I found myself managing massive sets and costume wardrobes and booking professional orchestras, costumers, and directing teams. This has become my passion. After returning to the university to fill in some gaps and prepare myself for this new path, I produced and often directed more than 100 shows. So narrowing this part down to one module is superhuman for me, but I'm going to do it. In our discussion of the Romantic era, I mentioned that two kinds of operas developed in France and Italy, with each country having a serious opera and a lighter comic opera that included more spoken dialogue. European and British light operas then, along with other influences in America in the early part of the century, such as vaudeville, minstrel shows, and extravaganzas, developed into American musical theater. Early musical theaters, such as the musicals of Gershwin in the 20s, had loosely connected plots spiced with hit songs and occasional unrelated dance numbers. But in the 1940s, the partnership of Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein ushered in a completely new style of composition called the integrated musical. The script was written first, and then all the songs and dances were created to develop the characters and to tell the story. This revolutionary concept ushered in what has come to be called the golden age of musical theater, which lasted from 1943 to 1965 and includes such classic shows as The Sound of Music, My Fair Lady, Fiddler on the Roof, The Music Man, and West Side Story. While the duo wrote many extraordinary works, including Oklahoma, Carousel, and The King and I, perhaps Rodgers and Hammerstein's best well-known work. While the duo wrote many extraordinary works, including Oklahoma, Carousel, South Pacific, and The King and I, perhaps their most well-known work is The Sound of Music, which told the story of the Austrian Trapp family singers who escaped from the Nazis during World War II and actually made their living performing in the United States. While the story of this real-life family is enhanced by the scriptwriters considerably, the show is absolutely captivating. It tells of a young novice named Maria who is too high-spirited for convent life, so is sent to serve as a governess for 7 children of a widowed naval captain, Georg von Trapp. When she realizes that she's falling in love with him and doesn't want to return, the mother abbess sings a song that has become a cherished classic, Climb Every Mountain. At the beginning, she can see that she needs to bring joy and music into the house again after the death of the children's mother, and she introduces the children to singing. While the naval captain is initially engaged to someone else, he finds himself falling in love with Maria. In the midst of this love story, Austria is taken over by the Nazis, whom Georg despises. Ultimately, Maria and Georg are married, and when they return from their honeymoon, he is greeted by Nazi officers who command him to take a position with the Navy of the Third Reich. He knows that serving them would be unthinkable, but refusal would mean the death of his family. So Maria and Georg plan a risky escape, even though they know they will lose everything they own when they do so. Here they arrange for the children to get a head start in this escape while they perform at an Austrian competition. The Sound of Music was Rodgers and Hammerstein's greatest success, winning the Tony for Best Musical. The movie version, released the following year, remains the largest selling movie musical ever made. Some critics found the story too sweet, yet they missed the major premise of the work. True, one premise is that music opens hearts and minds and binds people together. Another very important message, though, is that those who refuse to oppose evil actually become part of it. While many Austrians found it safe simply to fly the new flag, the real heroes are those who risked all to resist the Nazis. This wasn't the first time the duo confronted major issues in society in their productions. In South Pacific, a young Navy woman falls in love with a Frenchman. Set against the backdrop of World War II, the show wins audiences with their comic portrayal of the sailors who feel that they are really living the life on the beach, but some things are sorely missing. When Nellie learns that the Frenchman that she's in love with had a previous marriage with a Polynesian woman and actually has Polynesian children, she is forced to confront her own prejudice and then runs away from him. Another character, Lieutenant Cable, falls in love with a beautiful Polynesian girl but can't bring himself to marry her for the same reasons. When Cable shares his feelings with the Frenchman, he sings The Prejudice is Taught in this number that shocked the critics. In 1957, a young musician who was born and raised in Iowa before studying at Juilliard and working as a radio conductor in California released a musical as a love letter to his hometown. He had been working on the book, music, and lyrics for 8 years and revised it 30 times. But when Meredith Willson finally released The Music Man, critics and audiences raved, making it the biggest hit of the season, running for 1,375 performances. The story tells of a charismatic, fast-talking traveling salesman who sells band instruments and uniforms with the promise of teaching children how to perform, then takes the money and skips town each time the band instruments arrive. His usual plans fall apart, though, when he falls in love with Marion, the local librarian, and he decides to stay and face the music so he can marry her. Several period styles and inventive composing techniques were used for this work. The show starts with, and I use this analogy loosely, an early form of rap. Traveling salesmen chant their frustration with Harold Hill to the rhythm of a moving train. Notice this number, due to integrated musicals, sets up the plot in the musical. He shows his ability to control the town with a high-energy revival song, Trouble, convincing the townspeople that they have trouble in their town, later to be solved by buying his instruments and uniforms for a boys' band. He knows he can't succeed unless he convinces the local piano teacher, who was also the librarian, to support him, so he sets about to win her heart. The cast album for The Music Man won the first Grammy Award ever presented. The show won 8 Tony Awards, beating West Side Story for Best Musical and beating Bernstein for Best Composer. The production was turned into a movie in 1962. Robert Preston, who starred as Harold Hill on Broadway, was the only cast member carried over to the film, which also featured Shirley Jones, Buddy Hackett, and Ronnie Howard. When the film was released in Wilson's hometown of Mason City, Iowa, the producers did it in grand style. They brought in 100 marching bands for a 4-hour parade. Meredith Willson served as the band leader. Another duo that stands out in the Golden Age is Alan J. Lerner and Frederick Loewe, with their phenomenal masterpiece, My Fair Lady, written in 1956. The show is based upon the George Bernard Shaw play Pygmalion, inspired by the classical myth of a sculptor Pygmalion, who falls in love with one of his sculptures of a woman. He prays to Aphrodite to give the statue life, and then he marries her. Shaw combined this myth with a Cinderella fairy tale, turning the sculptor into a dry professor of phonetics who treats all women rudely except his mother. When he comes upon a Cockney flower girl who wants a better life, he decides to test his theories of economic circumstance. and attempts to transform her into someone who can pass for a duchess at an embassy ball. Lerner masterfully integrated story and song in this work, using his songs to advance the plot. He introduces the concept of the work in the opening scene, in which Professor Higgins complains about the horrible diction in the English language. Rex Harrison, who plays Higgins, wasn't a singer, so they developed a style of speaking on pitch to fit this performer. After taking in Eliza and struggling to teach her proper diction, Higgins, his colleague and former friend Colonel Pickering, and Eliza endure weeks of tireless work. When Higgins speaks convincingly to Eliza about the beauty of the English language and his conviction that she will master it, Eliza, transformed by his words, sits up and recites perfectly the lesson she has been practicing. Higgins and Pickering are giddy with excitement as they guide Eliza through all of her previously failed exercises, and she does them all perfectly. The dialogue flows perfectly into the number The Rain in Spain, which is one of the most jubilant moments in theater. If you haven't had the pleasure of watching this movie, I strongly advise it. It's an absolute joy to watch Eliza's transformation into an elegant woman and Higgins' admission that she has found a place in his heart. I don't want to spoil it. Just see it. Leonard Bernstein was another composer who, like Gershwin, was rooted in concert music. He wrote 3 symphonies that incorporated biblical material, jazz rhythms, and Jewish liturgical themes. He made his mark in the classical world, though, as an award-winning conductor of the New York Philharmonic, even conducting Beethoven's Symphony No. 9 in Berlin, celebrating the fall of the Berlin Wall. He exploded the musical theater world, though, with his groundbreaking musical, West Side Story. Bernstein was the only principal conductor of the New York Philharmonic to write Broadway musicals, so it explains why his scores are so very complex and his plots are so very New York. He worked with lyricist Stephen Sondheim and choreographer Jerome Robbins to create a modern-day Romeo and Juliet story set in New York with a love story between members of rival gangs. The orchestration in this work is the most difficult and complex the musical theater world had ever seen. It's important when discussing the music and dancing that we also acknowledge the work of Stephen Sondheim, who became a major composer in his own right on Broadway. In this production, though, he was the lyricist, and he wrote the lyrics to this work. His G. Officer Krupke is the derisive defense of the Jets pretending to talk to the cops, and it is a classic. You are assigned to watch this musical, which can be streamed on Netflix, and while watching it, you need to listen to the score. Notice the irregular rhythms that add tension to the music and the excellent way the choreography tells the story and fits the music. There are certain moves that are considered pure West Side Story. The sideways leaps, the running stooped finger snaps. Just say the name of the show to dancers and they flip into the moves. Dance was used in a new way in West Side Story. While it had been used in previous shows to express emotions, the type of emotion it was expressing was far different. The dance was far more explosive, using modern jazz to express pent-up frustrations. Also, even in parts of the show that had no dialogue, the dance told the story. The task of all choreography and integrated musicals was brought to a culmination in this work. Your assignment is to discuss 3 large dance numbers that further the plot in this work and discuss how they told the story. The 1980s saw the advent of shows that were so massive that some historians called them mega musicals. These shows relied on hydraulics and special tech. The 1980s saw the advent of shows that were so massive that some historians called them mega musicals. These shows relied on hydraulics and high-tech special effects, showing some influence from early extravaganzas. Although these productions were very expensive to produce, they drew such huge crowds that they ran for decades and more than paid for themselves. While I was fighting stress headaches with the massive expense of producing the Phantom of the Opera and the challenge of creating the impossible special effects, the larger headaches came when thousands of people were trying to buy tickets at the same time from our little office because the Andrew Lloyd Webber organization wouldn't allow us to use online ticketing or outside ticket outlets. I wonder if they just sat back laughing at night, imagining us trying to deal with the phone sales. Mega musicals mean mega headaches for producers and directors, I guess. Andrew Lloyd Webber is a phenomenally successful British composer whose hits have broken box office records on both sides of the Atlantic. He has written 14 musicals, winning him significant honors, including knighthood, peerage, 7 Tonys, 3 Grammys, an Academy Award, an Emmy, 7 Olivier Awards, a Golden Globe, and the Kennedy Center honors. Some of his greatest works include Cats, Evita, and Jesus Christ Superstar, but what sealed his fame is his colossal work, The Phantom of the Opera. Andrew Lloyd Webber premiered Phantom of the Opera in London in 1986 and in Broadway in 1988. It is based on the 1911 novel by Gaston Leroux. The plot deals with a deformed but brilliant theater technician and composer who falls in love with a pretty chorus girl, Christine, and concealed from her, pretends to be an angel who teaches her how to sing. Lloyd Webber created the part of Christine for Sarah Brightman, his wife at that time, who played the role both in London and on Broadway opposite Michael Crawford as the Phantom. Charles Hart was the lyricist. Like other Lloyd Webber works, the production mixes musical styles. Since the plot takes place in an opera house, several scenes depict opera rehearsals. Webber is actually extraordinary at writing this music. It's far more classic in style than his other works. He even uses some atonal music for the Phantom's daring opera at the end of the work. During the scenes when the characters are relating to each other, the style is less operatic, more musical theater. At every moment in the work, though, the music is far more difficult than the standard musical theater fare, requiring classically trained opera singers. Being a mega musical meant that it also had extraordinary technical demands. The story starts off with a massive chandelier that rises from the stage and travels to the ceiling. Often in huge productions like on Broadway, the chandelier alone costs $1 million. When I saw this show on Broadway, I turned to my family and said, I will never do this show. I kept reminding myself of that earlier comment. I had to be a little nuts to put together all of the massive sets and technical requirements for this work, but I loved the show so much that I decided to spend a year making it. The music from this work is so gorgeous that it is a challenge to pick the most beautiful selections from the show. Here is the Phantom's Music of the Night, sung by the Phantom when he decides to cover up his deformities with a mask and bring Christine to his home under the opera house. Christine desperately misses her father and his advice. Tormented by the jealous affection of the Phantom because of her love for Raoul, she goes to the cemetery asking for his help. The success of The Phantom of the Opera is without parallel. It has outstripped all other long-running shows in the history of Broadway. It has played there for more than 25 years. When it was released, it captured several Tonys, including Best Musical, but lost the award for Best Score to Sondheim's Into the Woods. It also racked in Drama Desk Awards, Olivia Awards, and Outer Critics Circle Awards, plus a host of awards from multiple other countries, including Sweden, Canada, and Australia. Lloyd Webber's licensing agency, the Really Useful Theater Group, protects this musical with fangs and claws. I can understand, really, because so many of his musicals failed afterwards and lost millions of dollars. They need to protect their moneymaker. But they were, without a doubt, the most miserable company I have ever dealt with for creating a musical. Even though they are based in London, they studied my every move microscopically and hung over me with threats of lawsuits and termination of rights if I did anything they didn't feel was within their permissions. And their permissions were very strict. Absolutely no mention of the words "The Phantom of the Opera" were allowed on the internet. Think about it. Every newspaper article, TV interview, everything ends up on the internet. Try promoting a massively expensive show, which you have to because creating it costs as much as buying a house and you have to sell tickets to break even, without ever using the name of the show. And that was just one of their restrictions. I often had Monday morning phone calls from the licensing agency telling me my rights were withdrawn after spending tens of thousands of dollars for some perceived wrongdoing. With them, I was guilty until proven innocent, so I had to constantly prove my innocence to avoid their wrath. Yes, it was the stress headache of the century, but with such a breathtaking result. Another production from the 80s that matched the superstar realm of Phantom came from France. Claude Michel Schoenberg and Alain Boublil created the epic Les Miserables, based on Victor Hugo's novel. British producer Cameron Mackintosh teamed with Cats director Trevor Nunn to bring it to London in 1985 and to Broadway in 1987, then toured it to nearly every city in the civilized world. While Les Mis required massive hydraulics with its rotating stage, it had far more than spectacle going for it. It is a very touching story of Jean Valjean, who is imprisoned for 19 years for stealing bread for his starving sister and for her family. When he's released on parole, he is required to display a yellow ticket advertising that he's an ex-convict. A saintly bishop takes him in for the evening, and desperately he steals the bishop's silver and escapes. When the police arrest him, the bishop tells them that the silver was really a gift and presents him with 2 additional candlesticks, later telling Valjean that he has bought his soul for God. Valjean decides to turn his life to good, creating a new identity with which he becomes a factory owner and a mayor of the city. One of his workers, Fantine, has a fight with her co-workers and a factory foreman who is angry because she rejected his advances and uses it as an excuse to fire her. She ends up on the streets and needs to support herself and her daughter by becoming a prostitute. When she fights off an abusive customer, she is arrested and taken to court. Valjean comes to the trial One of his workers, Fantine, has a fight with her co-workers and the factory foreman, who is angry because she rejected his advances and uses it as an excuse to fire her. She ends up on the streets and needs to support herself and her daughter by becoming a prostitute. When she fights off an abusive customer, she's arrested and taken to court. Valjean comes to the trial and realizes that she used to work for him and was unfairly dismissed. He takes her to the hospital. As she is dying, he promises to find and care for her daughter, Cosette. Through all these encounters, Javert pursues Valjean for breaking his parole, and France is in a state of revolution with students singing "Do You Hear the People Sing?" Cosette, now grown, falls in love with the revolutionary Marius. While this was released as a movie in 2012, the producers of that movie weren't interested in capturing the extraordinary music of this work. although they did a good job telling the story. So to show you this music, I'm playing the end of Act 1 from the 10th anniversary concert of the stage show. Cosette and Marius sing of their love for each other, their love story, the passion of the revolutionaries, and the conflicted relationship of Javert and Valjean make for a gripping, dramatic work filled with extraordinary music. Here is a clip from the ending of the show for the 25th anniversary concert. Valjean is dying, and Fantine and those who died in the revolution come to take him to heaven. What an incredibly powerful work. No matter how many times I hear it, it still gives me goosebumps.